We're talking Tampa Bay Buccaneers football on the Ourlads Football Network, the Ourlads Football YouTube Channel. And once again, joining us is James Yarcho, Locked On Bucs. How's it going, James?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good. How can we not be doing good, right? If we're covering football and football season is here.
Yep. Mix that in with my son's hockey schedule, and I don't sleep ever.
Hockey in August. Gotta love it. Okay, so the Tampa Bay Bucks are fresh off of a huge season last year. Nobody expected to win the division. They win a playoff game, competitive in the semifinals of the NFC. So that's really cool. But you got to do it all over again. And many people are predicting the Atlanta Falcons are going to win the division. And I understand why. I mean, I actually did pick Tampa Bay to win a division last year. It was one of my most prideful predictions last year. But even I'm looking at it and realize Tampa Bay's second straight year is not the easiest thing to do. Atlanta definitely looks like they're primed. They've got a good team. So what are you hearing and what are you thinking as far as whether it's the fans or yourself on how hard and difficult this is going to be for the Bucs to repeat what they did last season?
Well, it's definitely going to be more challenging than it was last year, right? Atlanta absolutely made some improvements. Raheem Morris finally gets another opportunity to be a head coach again. It's a long time coming for him. But the big question, at least to me, surrounding the Atlanta Falcons is how is Kirk Cousins going to come back after rupturing his Achilles? Everybody is so high on him, and he hasn't had the postseason success that he has compared to the regular season. And he's not exactly young. So is he going to be the Kirk Cousins that we saw in Minnesota? And if he is, obviously Atlanta is definitely going to give Tampa a run for their money. But to me, this is still Tampa's division to lose. If any other team in the NFL had gone into free agency and come away with Mike Evans, Antoine Winfield Jr., Levante David, and Baker Mayfield, they would have been crowned the kings of the offseason. So just because the Bucs kept it all in-house, it's not as sexy, it's not a headline grabber, and it's more of business as usual. Then they make some incredible additions in the draft, completely revamped the interior of the offensive line. They helped the running backs and really focused in on some of their deficiencies from 2023. Then you add in Liam Cohen as the offensive coordinator, bring some of that Sean McVay Rams style offense to Tampa, which is going to be similar to the offense they have in Atlanta. So it's going to be a really tight race between those two teams. And it may come down to something as simple as a tiebreaker to decide who wins that division.
Yeah, let's start with Cohen, because that's one of the other things everybody seems to be pointing to is that, you lose your offensive coordinator. He's a hot shot coach. He's now in Carolina. That'll make even Carolina better. So that toughens up the division as well. But for Cohen, they don't know who he is. We talked about this before, of course, about his ties with Baker, which is something that matters. It's definitely not like Baker hasn't seen this coach before. And that's definitely going to be something that they'll look to seamlessly as best as possible, work that favorably for the Bucs this season. But as far as scheme, I've heard that they're going to run a similar style, but you said McVay, of course, that's where Cohen was the last few years. And we know McVay uses a lot of 11 personnel. So what do you expect scheme-wise? Do you think it's going to be more like it was or more like what we have seen from the Rams?
I think it's going to be a really nice mixture of the two. They've already said that there's going to be a lot of 2 tight end sets for this Buccaneers offense. That's why they kept 4 on their 53-man roster. Rookie Devin Culp makes the cut. You still have Ko Kieft. Then you have Payne Durham and Cade Otton, who are going to be your 2 primary tight ends. And there's a heavy focus on the run game. Rachaad White, one of the best running backs in the NFL last year, that doesn't really get enough credit because the Bucs as a team overall were so bad at running the football. But Rachaad was, just a handful of yards away from 1,000-yard season. So you add in Bucky Irving, and now you have a healthy Sean Tucker who looked phenomenal in the preseason. And all of that is going to help Baker Mayfield. So they're going to, they're going to ground and pound similar to what they tried to do last year under Canales, but now they're really going to open things up for Baker Mayfield. And I think what I love so much about Cohen's style, at least from what we've heard and limited as to what we've seen, is that he puts the power in the hands of his leaders on offense. Baker, Graham Barton, Tristan Wirfs, Mike Evans, those guys are going to have the power in the huddle to kind of have a multiple choice of what play they want to run. Cohen's going to call 3 or 4 plays at a time and say, look, you guys are the ones having to go up against this defense. You guys are the ones that have to try to expose these mismatches. So you guys decide what you're going to do from this list that I'm giving you. These are the plays that I think can work. You pick the best one, and let's move this football down the field. So a lot of trust in Baker Mayfield, who might be one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL in terms of pre-snap reads. And so that's really going to play favorably for Baker to be able to put himself and the offense in the best position possible. So I expect a heavy dose of Rachaad White and Bucky Irving. But then you still have Mike Evans, you still have Chris Godwin, and Jalen McMillan's going to be an absolute superstar in the NFL. Baker finally has a legitimate wide receiver 3, something they didn't have last year because Russell Gage went down with injury in training camp and missed the entire season. So Liam Cohen is very much a player's coach, and he wants to allow his players to decide what they're going to do because they're the ones that have to do it, not him.
Yeah, I was noticing that the Bucs have kept so far, because we know that could change with any pickups here, but so far they've kept 2 free agents, college free agents who were not drafted, and wide receiver Cameron Johnson from Barton, and also defensive back Tyreek Funderburk from App State. Meanwhile, it looks like, at least on the Ourlads depth chart, that 3 rookies will end up starting for the Bucs. Is that the case?
Yeah, you're going to have Graham Barton starting at center. He was the first-round pick. He is the locked-in, loaded guy. Jalen McMillan, as I mentioned, the wide receiver 3, kind of that, a guy that slipped to them at the end of the third that had no business falling that far, but dealt with a lot of injury in his last year at Washington. He's an absolute monster. And then Tyke Smith is, of course, going to be a big part of what Todd Bowles wants to do with his defensive backs. They kept 11 defensive backs on this roster because of the versatility that so many of them bring to be able to play safety, play nickel corner, play on special teams. So he's probably going to be the guy slotted at nickel corner to start the season, but there's going to be a solid rotation between he and Christian Izien, who played extremely well as an undrafted rookie last year. And don't be surprised if there are a couple of formations that you see this year where Todd Bowles has 6 defensive backs out on that field, because so many of them are so good and so versatile that you can line up in one configuration, but then all of a sudden it's Antoine Winfield Jr. who's blitzing and Tyke Smith is dropping back as a safety, or you're bringing Christian Izien off the edge and all of a sudden you have Bryce Hall that's going to go over in coverage. There's a lot of different ways that Todd Bowles can play with this defense, and it's going to be really interesting to see how he utilizes all 11 of these defensive backs, especially when the Bucs only kept 5 wide receivers and they only kept 3 running backs. So those guys are even though they're not starters, they're going to play pivotal roles in this bowl scheme.
Yeah, there seems to be that when people talking about why the Bucs may not be able to repeat this year, that they're concerned with the secondary. So you just talked about it. Of course, they lose Carlton Davis primarily, but you don't think that's the case? You think that the secondary will be fine?
Absolutely. I think the Bucs would not have traded Carlton Davis if Zion McCollum hadn't shown that he could get the job done last year, filling in for Davis, filling in for Jamel Dean due to injury. He really played outstanding football. And if he can build off of that even more, it makes the decision look that much better. And I truly believe that if McCollum had not done that, the Bucs would have been able to get the money to work. It was basically unloading some cap to move on from him. If Jamel Dean's contract hadn't been the way that it was, he probably would have been the one to be let go, but he had way too much dead money for them to be able to move him. Jamel Dean has had a history of injuries. Hopefully he can stay healthy this season. He's put a big focus on getting his body right and being able to withstand a full season. And then Zion McCollum, one of the big knocks on him last year was that he couldn't intercept a pass. He had 4 or 5 of them that hit him right in the hands and he dropped them. These were game-changing plays had he made them. So he goes out and buys a jugs machine, teaches his brand new bride how to operate the jugs machine. And they were going out to parks throughout the Tampa area all summer long with her operating the machine and him working on his catching ability. He's made play after play after play in training camp. Didn't see him much in the preseason, as it was with most of the starters, but he's coming away with quite a few interceptions in camp. Hopefully that translates to the regular season. But this secondary is so talented and underrated. It's a matter of health. Can Jamel Dean stay on the field? Can Zion McCollum stay on the field, which he hasn't had a problem with? But then you have Bryce Hall, you have Tyke Smith, you have Isian, you have Funderburk, who, still a little raw, but showed flashes. And then you have all of these safeties. They can really do a lot with all of the different combinations that they can have out there. So I'm not worried about the corners so much as I would be the edge rush for the Buccaneers.
All right, then let's talk about that. Of course, the Bucs use a 3-4 and a Todd Bowles attacking style type of defense. So is it really important of course, their second round draft pick was Braswell. Diaby was a key third round pick from last year. So those are the two key players, right? As far as if this team is going to get more consistent pass rush or an elevated pass rushing game this year, some of it's got to come from those two.
Yeah, there's a lot of hype around Yaya Diaby, whether it's, people that cover the Bucs on a daily basis or even nationally. Albert Breer was talking about how one of his big takeaways from the Buccaneers offseason is that Yaya Diaby is a double-digit sack guy, and the Bucs need to see that. But again, he's got to stay healthy. He got hurt in training camp. He dealt with injury last year. He has to be able to stay on the field because the Bucs are putting a lot of pressure on him to be the anchor of that edge rush. Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, a former first-round pick, has not lived up to expectations. Had a career high in sacks last year, but it was only 4.5. It wasn't great, and he's been able to get pressure, but he hasn't been able to finish the plays.
Yeah.
So, Braswell's a guy that Todd Bowles is really high on, talks about how he gets better and better every single day. We saw that throughout the preseason. Struggled a little bit against the Bengals, did better against Jacksonville. Then against Miami, he comes away with a big sack. So, he's progressively getting better, but it's all about the rotation. Jose Ramirez is unbelievable. And this is another player. Both Jose Ramirez and Marquise Watts dealt with injury last year, but these were guys that the Bucs were really high on. Jose Ramirez is so quick off the snap and has such incredible bend that if he's not getting after the quarterback, he's drawing a holding penalty because he's so much faster than the guys that have to get back and block him. And they don't have any choice but to grab onto him and get flagged. We saw him draw 3 holding penalties against the Cincinnati Bengals alone in preseason, just absolutely ate them up. So he's going to get plenty of opportunity. There's not really, it's long gone are the Shaq Barrett JPP days where those are your, tried and true every down kind of guys. This is going to be a heavy rotation. Yaya Diaby obviously going to get the most snaps, but Marquise Watts, Jose Ramirez, Anthony Nelson, Chris Braswell, they are going to be rotated early and often, keeping all of these guys fresh and really seeing who emerges as kind of that number 2 guy after Yaya.
Yeah, it's not easy to go from Eastern Michigan to the NFL.
No.
Just ask Max Crosby. And even though he got off to a much better start, it took him a couple of years. And now look how good Crosby is. But you look at Ramirez, just looking at the stats that I jotted down when I was doing my research on him, in 36 games, he had 156 tackles, 34 for loss, 20 and a half sacks, 6 forced fumbles, was the MAC Defensive Player of the Year in 2022, and had a career high in sacks with 12 and tackles for loss in 19 and a half. That is major production no matter what conference you're in college football. And he was on the practice squad last year, right? We didn't see any time. So this is what the practice squad was for, is to get these guys that weren't ready in year 1 to come out and bust out in year 2.
Yeah, exactly. And, he really showed why the Bucs trusted him so much last year, keeping him around. He was protected a couple of times because there started to be some buzz rolling around regarding Ramirez. And then again, Marquise Watts is kind of the same way. He dealt with injury, got a little bit of playing time, but not a ton. He has really just taken leaps and bounds in improving his game. So these guys are going to be crucial to any success that the Buccaneers have, because we know Todd Bowles loves to blitz. He loves to, get after the quarterback, and his defense is predicated on that ability. And if these guys can't get the job done and they leave the secondary out to dry, I don't care how good your secondary is. If a quarterback has 4, 5, 6 seconds to pass the ball, he's going to carve you up. The DBs cannot hang with receivers for that long. So, those guys are absolutely pivotal in any success the Bucs will have. And if that edge rush struggles, the Bucs as a whole are going to struggle, and we're going to be talking about them potentially missing out on the playoffs.
You talked about a potential trade of Shanka because this is the last year of his deal. Obviously, that hasn't happened yet. Do you think that's still a possibility at some point?
No, not at this stage. It would have been, if it was going to get done, it would have been done earlier in the offseason, probably before training camp. It was kind of a long shot to begin with. It was one of those names that kind of floated out there, was like, you know what, this makes sense. Rumored the Cowboys were interested, the Steelers were interested, those kinds of teams. But at this stage in the game now, with the 53-man roster set, Randy Gregory not showing up and subsequently being released, the Bucs can't afford to get rid of Joe Tryon-Shoyinka unless they're getting an edge rusher in return. And those player-for-player trades just don't tend to happen often.
All right, up front, Vea, we know how good he is. Cansey had a nice rookie season. What do you expect, especially from Cansey? You think he's ready to take that big leap in year two?
Absolutely. And he's another guy, dealt with injury at the beginning of last year, missed some time. He's healthy now, and has been working with Vita Vea, was working with Gerald McCoy, who is a criminally underrated player for the Buccaneers for years and years, because he played for so long on such terrible teams. But Gerald McCoy has been working with him, trying to help him establish some more pass rush moves. The thing that Cansey is so good with is how fast he is off the snap. And because he's a little bit leaner and a little bit smaller and a lot quicker than most defensive linemen, it gives him kind of an advantage where he can disrupt the pocket a little bit. Vita Vea being the wrecking ball that he is, he disrupts the pocket. And those guys are going to be pivotal in allowing these edge rushers to really be able to make some plays, as well as, the Todd Bowles is going to send Levante David. He's going to send Servassier Dennis. He's going to send Antoine and Izzian and Tyke on blitzes. So Cansey and Vea are the ones kind of at the front lines here to be able to wreak havoc, disrupt some things. They may not have eye-popping sack numbers, but their play will affect what the other players are able to do by collapsing the interior of that pocket, getting the quarterback off of his spot, forcing bad throws, forcing rush throws that are going to inevitably turn into incompletions or interceptions. So yeah, Cansey's gonna take a big leap forward. Vita Vea is going to continue to be the all-pro that he is year in and year out.
And Logan Hall. So is this the guy that they really need to get some production out of him? Do you have confidence at all that could happen, that he could, at year three justify, or year two, I should say, it is year three, justify his status as a second-round draft pick?
Yeah, he's kind of in that Joe Tryon-Shoyinka category where the production has not matched the draft value. As you mentioned, he was a second-round pick. Well, that was because the Bucs traded out of the first round to the early second round. So he was still their first draft pick of that class. And like Tryon-Shoyinka, he's shown flashes. He has looked much better this training camp and this preseason than he has in year past. So, they're kind of hopeful that he's going to take the step forward, but I don't think it's going to be a situation where all of a sudden he becomes this massively impactful player. They just need him to be consistent. They need him to not disappear for drives at a time before he makes one flashy or splash play. He's going to be really important in their ability to stop the run. The Bucs hang their hat on their ability to turn opposing offenses one-dimensional by removing their running back and the running game entirely from an offense's game plan. So he's going to be really, really important in that phase. That's why Will Golston is still on the roster. He is one of the best that the Bucs have in stopping the run. So, I look for Vay and Cansey to be more of the getting in the backfield guys, collapsing the pocket guys, whereas Logan Hall needs to be that tried and true, steady, even keel guy that you can rely on to, stop the run for a loss or short gain, no gain, while everybody else around kind of handles their own business.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that when I look over the stats before we talk about the offense, it's interesting because I think if you're only looking at stats, you can see, well, wait a second, they were really poor pass defense last year. Yards allowed a little bit better in completion percentage, but yards allowed was high. Yet they were good against the run, and they also had a decent number of sacks. So I think that's my impression is that's where some of these analysts or some people who are just doing research on the Bucs might be saying, well, they just lost their number one corner, say. Their pass defense wasn't good last year. It was all about the pass rush. I just can't trust that secondary now. But what I look at is you've talked about, at least a handful of guys that were dealing with injuries last year and did not complete a season or did not have a full season. And this is a team that still made the playoffs. And so if they and still had a very good pass rush and so forth against the run. So if they can stay healthy as a unit, I don't see any reason why they can't be better than last year.
Yeah, and another big part that we didn't really even touch on as far as their pass defense is they were a one safety team last year, and it was Antoine Winfield Jr. Ryan Neal was a massive, massive disappointment. He was a liability in both the pass and the run game. Now you bring in Jordan Whitehead. You get him back in this Todd Bowles system, and he's a different player than he was when he left the Buccaneers. Jason Light even said, it broke his heart to let Jordan Whitehead walk because they did love him so much. So he was a guy that they zoned in on immediately as part of this free agent class. One of the few outside free agents that they actually brought in. He and Antoine have an incredible friendship, an incredible bond, a lot of trust in one another. That's going to help the back end of this defense. And then there's no more Devin White. Devin White was always a liability in pass coverage, could not cover a wheel route to save his life. And he would give up some explosive plays. So, they may have lost Carlton Davis, sure, and he struggled some throughout last year. But, yeah, this was a defense that, by and large, dealt with a lot of injuries. Devin White was hurt. Levante David was hurt. Carlton Davis, Jamel Dean, they were both hurt. There was a couple of occasions where Zion McCollum had to play safety because they only had Antoine Winfield Jr. left. So this is, again, it's not a lot of jaw-dropping, sexy, headline-grabbing names. Sure. But these are solid football players in a Todd Bowles style that were handpicked by him that are going to be able to go out and really get the job done.
And I guess before we move over, you mentioned David, probably shouldn't move on without at least bringing him up since he's the big dog back there. It's still at his age. Any reason to think from what you've seen so far that there will be a drop off, or does he just look like the same old Levante David?
He is the ageless wonder and the single most overlooked and underrated player in the National Football League.
That's a good one. I'm not going to argue with that. He doesn't get a lot of credit because of where he plays and so forth. And even when Tampa Bay did win a Super Bowl, it wasn't Levante David they were talking about.
No, everybody was talking about Devin White, but you could put Levante David's numbers up against just about anybody in NFL history. This is a guy that has had a Hall of Fame career without a shadow of a doubt, and he did so on a lot of really bad football teams, but he doesn't get the Pro Bowl votes. He doesn't get the All-Pro considerations for whatever reason, and it may cost him his ability to be enshrined in Canton. It shouldn't, but it might.
I don't know about that. Even though they're saying they're toughening up, they're going to toughen up things. We'll see. But he's definitely some of the players they have been putting in. No question, he's a Hall of Famer. Okay, so let's take a look at the offense, and we already talked about some of the rookies. Irving is the one that is getting a lot of press, even though McMillan is too. So that's got to be real exciting to know that you've got two rookies who could be really impactful players for this offense this season.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I'll be completely honest. When Bucky Irving was selected, I was disappointed. I had been pounding the table on Locked On Bucs that the Bucs absolutely need a running back, but I was looking more for like the Audric Estime type, right? The pure complement to Rachaad White, a guy that can still catch the ball. So when he's in the game, he can make a play in the passing game. He can pick up blitzes, but he can also run the ball. But he'd be the big bruising body for short yardage, for goal line, for things like that. Instead, they go with the smaller, quicker Bucky Irving. And the more I started to sit down and watch him, watch how he operated at Oregon, and then into rookie minicamp and OTAs and all that, Bucky Irving is incredible. He is a one-cut, two-step, full-speed player, and he is a 70-yard touchdown run waiting to happen on any given play. He's the kind of player that once he gets to the second level, if he makes a guy miss, there's nobody that's going to catch him. He may not have the combine 40 speed that you look for,
Sure,
but he's game fast. And there's a big difference between a 40-yard dash and NFL game fast. And Bucky is absolutely that. He's one of the guys that they're going to look to with the new kickoff rules. It's him, it's Sean Tucker, it's Cameron Johnson. Those are the Trey Palmer might be in the mix a little bit, but they're looking for those guys that are one cut, two steps, and you're full speed to be able to exploit some of the way that these teams are running the new kickoff rules, because it is, once you get past that first wave and it's one-on-one with another player, nobody's catching Bucky Irving. So I absolutely love his fit in Liam Cohen's offense. And as I mentioned earlier, Rachaad White, nearly 1,000-yard rusher, but he had to do it all by himself last year. Chase Edmonds dealt with injury. Sean Tucker, he went undrafted because of medical issues. He never really got to the level that the Bucs thought he would. He has now. He's been incredibly impressive now. 20+ yard run in each of the first two preseason games. The exact same thing, one cut, and he was off to the races. So now Rachaad finally has a guy that can come in and do all the same things that he does: pick up blitzes, catch the ball, run the ball, to the outside, run it up the middle, all of those things. And it's not all on him to be the lone horse in the running back game or in the running attack. So yeah, Bucky Irving is going to have a really impressive season. Nothing crazy. I'm not calling for 1,000 yards from Bucky. Sure. I think Rachaad will, but yeah, Bucky's going to be a key player in the offense.
So fantasy wise, would you be a little bit hesitant on where you're drafting Rachaad White now because of that, because he was such a workhorse and did everything, that now Bucky's going to, and maybe even Sean will take some of those carries away? Or do you look at it, you've already kind of answered my question, but do you look at it more as it's just going to make Tampa Bay even that more explosive, and White will still get his touches and still get his opportunities, but now the Bucs are going to score even more points because they've got better play in the backfield?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, full disclosure, I took Rachaad White in the third round of my fantasy draft. Okay. I have nothing but confidence in him, especially if you're in a PPR or a half-point PPR. The best thing about Bucky and Sean Tucker being able to take a little bit off of Rashaad's plate is that late in games, when that defense starts to get worn down, Rashaad's going to be more fresh than he was before. So now you're looking at even more ability for those explosive plays, getting him in space with the football in the passing game, or Graham Barton, Ben Bredesen, and Cody Mauch wearing down the defensive line, being able to run up the middle, and then it's one-on-one with those linebackers. No, Rachaad is still going to be a top fantasy option, and by the end of the season, we're going to be talking about him as one of the best running backs in the NFL. And this time, I don't think the Bucs' overall run offense is going to be bad enough to overlook that.
Yeah, I had him on my fantasy team last year, so I was very, very pleased with the season he had. I just wanted to make sure there, too, that if I decide to take him again, I'm not going to have to worry. You talked about Bredesen, the offensive line. Now, again, I'm not sure. You tell me, because, again, I thought it looked like it was going to be a battle with Bredesen and Opeta, but with the injury, did that basically just open the door and this was Bredesen's job? Was it by default, or would you think he would have won it anyway?
It was kind of a weird roller coaster because early on in those OTAs, the mini camps, things like that, early in the offseason process, there was a lot of buzz about Opeta and how well he was doing, how much the coaches liked him. Then you got into training camp, and all of a sudden, Bredesen was starting to take more and more snaps away from Opeta with the first team, when they were still kind of bouncing back and forth between the two, giving them a true opportunity for a competition. Bredesen kind of took that job by the throat and really just wrestled it away from Opeta. Now, unfortunately, Opeta didn't get much of an opportunity to try to steal it back because of that torn ACL. But even somebody like Elijah Klein, who when he was drafted, we all kind of knew he was a raw prospect, but you saw the building blocks there that he could be a really good offensive lineman. He came on really, really strong and could have fought, for that opportunity. He may be a guy that the Bucs are talking about starting this time next year. Bredesen's only on a 1-year deal. So,
okay.
Bredesen definitely earned it, even though he theoretically won it by default. His play was much, much better than we saw last year with the Giants. Maybe that's because of the guys around him. Graham Barton on one side, the best left tackle in the NFL on the other side. That's going to help him elevate his play for sure. Bredesen is a really, really solid addition to this offensive line. I was pretty iffy on it when it happened, but it looks like a great move. And, Jason Light knows his offensive lineman.
By the way, the other two guys, Gedeke and Mauk. Mauk seemed to struggle a little bit last year. Gedeke struggled his rookie season, but surprisingly played better as a tackle. That usually doesn't work that way. Going from guard to tackle, you actually improve your game, but sometimes it does. So and that's one side of a line, and then you have a rookie in the middle. So what's the look so far on that side of the line?
I think you're going to see even more improvement out of Gedeke. I think the improvement came because he was a tackle in college. They thought he would translate to the inside. He didn't. Put him back to his natural position, even though he's a little undersized for a tackle in the NFL. He really was so much more comfortable and so much more confident that showed on the field. As far as Mauk, he had his ups and downs as a rookie. There were some games where he was absolutely outstanding, other games where it seemed like he had hit the rookie wall. I expect a jump from him. And then Graham Barton is just he's kind of a freak of nature. And, Baker's talked about it. Liam Cohen's talked about it. Tristan has talked about it. And this is a player that in training camp, in practice, he's having to go up against Vita Vea every single day. He's not going to see very many players in regular season games that are as good as Vita Vea is. So it might even be a little bit easier for him not having to deal with that on a week-to-week basis. But then one of the things that's so impressive about Graham Barton is his ability to swing out and become a lead blocker. We saw it in the final preseason game against the Miami Dolphins. Rashad White got a little swing pass, and then boom, Graham Barton was there just mowing guys down, leading the charge. It ended up being, I believe, a 17-yard catch and run for Rashad. So, that opens up a aspect of the offense that we didn't really see out of Robert Hainsey. And I love Robert Hainsey, but he's not Graham Barton with all due respect.
Sure. Yeah.
He's a phenomenal depth piece. And God forbid something happened, you have someone with NFL starting experience, but Graham Barton is built different.
Okay, just before I let you go, talk about some of these later round picks and free agents, just to, if any of them can do something more than just make the team. I mentioned, of course, Johnson at wide receiver. You've got Klein, the 6th rounder, Culp, the 7th rounder, Funderburk again, another college free agent. So talk about some of those guys. Which ones do you think, or which one, if one, do you think has the best chance of maybe to actually producing and being a complement to the team as early as this season?
I think you have to go with Cameron Johnson. And he was a guy I was a little skeptical on as well. He was getting a lot of praise, a lot of love, but again, dealt with some injuries. So he was missing time, didn't play in the first 2 preseason games, but everyone kept talking about how much the Bucs coaching staff loved him. The front office loved him. And then I finally got to watch him, and he's good. He's got some really, really good hands, and he's a guy that can be utilized as a receiver. They used him in the run game against the Dolphins in that preseason game. He is going to be one of those guys that's back there returning kicks. So they're going to utilize his speed. They're going to utilize his hands. The Bucs are going to run a lot of 3 wide. And it can't always be Mike and Chris and Jalen. Yeah. Cameron Johnson is going to be a guy. He can go over the middle. He can burn you on the outside. He can stretch out the defense by taking the safety off the top. He's a versatile, really, really solid player. And being the first NFL player out of his college, because they just brought back football after 70-year hiatus. It's a really special story, a really fun story. So I think out of the guys that we didn't already talk about, McMillan and Irving, Cameron Johnson is a player that everyone needs to kind of keep their eye on as far as kind of that David Moore role that we saw from the Bucs last year, where it's not going to be every game.
Sure.
But there are going to be spots where I'm going to be going on my show and talking about, a game-changing play or a big-time score that Cameron Johnson had when he got his opportunity.
Yeah, and it's, again, impressive considering there's only 5 receivers that were left after cut down. Now, that could change, but still, usually you would go, well, that's because there was 6, 7, definitely 6, but 5, and he's one of them. That's pretty impressive. And then is Otten definitely the man, and you expect even more production from him? And even if that's the case, do any of those other 3 tight ends, are they capable of more?
Otten's definitely the top guy. I don't know if I would say that he's going to have more production than last year. I honestly think it'll probably be around the same. Okay. He's going to be an option on 3rd down. He was really reliable in those situations to move the sticks. Had a couple of nice touchdowns, had a game-winning touchdown against the Atlanta Falcons. Payne Durham, you can visibly see the step forward that he's taken. And like I mentioned, Liam Cohen's going to run a lot of 2 tight end sets. So there might be times that Otten is staying in and blocking and Durham's going out on the route, or vice versa. Devin Colt was relatively impressive throughout training camp, and in the preseason, he's going to be going out on more routes and having more opportunity in the passing game than Ko Kieft will. Kieft will get 5 or 6 targets on the year.
Yeah,
and they're always fun and they're always exciting and fans get super hyped when Ko Kieft gets the ball.
Yeah.
But Culp's kind of that 3rd pass catching option. I think where Otten's going to either stay the same or even maybe lose a little bit of production is because of the additions of Bucky Irving and Jalen McMillan. Those are going to be such huge additions in the passing game that it might cause Otten to miss out a little bit. He's still going to be utilized. Don't draft him in fantasy, but he's still going to be a key member of the offense, especially on 3rd downs and in the red zone.
And lastly, they picked up Pratt, and Trask is still on this team. So, of course he is. So, what do you think? Because I mean, I heard pretty decent things about Pratt this preseason. A little surprised that he was cut, but they've got a star young quarterback and they have another backup they like. So maybe not that crazy. But still, what do you think about what it could say? Do you think there's a real possible chance that in 2025 Pratt's the number 2 guy?
I think it's absolutely possible, and that's why the Bucs went out and got him. They were interested in him in the draft.
Okay.
That was a guy that they did really like and thought could be a solid fit in Liam Cohen's offense. Who knows what the future lies for Kyle Trask? I think he's going to have the opportunity to return as the number 2 quarterback if he wants to. He might look for an opportunity elsewhere where he could compete, in a real competition for a starting quarterback job. Might find himself in a situation where the starter isn't as solidified as Baker Mayfield will be.
Yeah.
But Pratt now has the opportunity to kind of sit on this practice squad, learn Cohen's offense, and be ready for next season if the Bucs choose to bring him back. He's an exciting quarterback to watch, and could really be interesting as the quarterback too if Trask decides to move on.
All right, give me a prediction. What are you thinking? And let me ask you, what was your prediction last year?
I did predict the Bucs to win the NFC South.
Okay, cool.
I think I had them at 10-7 last year. This year, I'm kind of right in the same spot. This is a 10-win football team. They have a really tough schedule after the bye. Things kind of lighten up a little bit. They have a gauntlet to start the year. They have 3 primetime games in a span of 5 weeks. They have to play the Chiefs. They have to play the Niners. They're, at Detroit in week 2. They have the Eagles. It's a tough open to the year. After that, they get the Giants. They get, they get the Saints. They get the Panthers a couple of times. So things really start to open up. I think the ceiling for this Buccaneers team is 11 wins, and I think the floor is probably 8. If injuries start to pile up again, if there's some issues there, I still think they're an 8-win football team. But as I said, it's their division until it's not. And I don't fully trust Kirk Cousins coming off of that ruptured Achilles. Falcons have a lot of primetime games. We know about primetime Kirk, so we're going to have to see how that plays out. But I firmly believe that it is a 2-horse race for this division. The Saints are not going to be in the running for the South. The Panthers most certainly are not going to be in the running for the South. So it'll really boil down to whether or not the Bucs can overcome that first place schedule that they have, and a lot of the top quarterbacks in the NFL that they're going to have to figure out how to shut down.
Yeah, I think and I agree. I'm going to pick them to win again. A couple of reasons. One, if I don't pick them after picking them last year and they win, I'll feel like an idiot. Number 2 is that I think it's just a sexy, it's a sexy thing to do to take Atlanta. Let's take a new team. Let's go with Atlanta. Look at all this stuff that's going on over here. But as you said, well, first of all, wait a second. This team won the division. Most of the key guys are back. They might even be better. They could be healthier, and they don't have to go through any scheme changes. Basically, yes, they got a new coordinator. We get that, but it's not a major deal as much as I think people are letting it out to be. Compared to that other team that's going through a major scheme change on offense, major. And even on defense a little bit. So yeah, I think because of that, it just makes a lot more sense that if you took them last year, you should just take them again this year. So,
well, and if you rewind the clock to this time last year, it was all about the Saints. Everyone was picking the Saints.
Absolutely right.
They were the sexy pick. And It was like, oh, well, yeah. And I think a lot of the shade that gets thrown the Bucs way is because people were so committed to they're not going to be good after the Brady years. They have Baker Mayfield, who's not a good quarterback.
Yeah.
And they desperately want to be right rather than give Baker the credit that he's due.
I like that. I know that's a fact. That's a good one. And I also like that reference back to the Saints. I'll use that one because it's the truth. And why was it? Because they're getting Derek Carr. Mm-hmm. Oh, look, Derek Carr, Atlanta, Kirk Cousins, a little similar. So, all right, we're on the same page. That's cool. All right, James. So I look forward to talking to you during the season, especially if this is as good as the season as we both anticipated it might be. Best of luck. And meanwhile, just want to remind everybody, Locked On Bucs, and that's also Locked On Bucs podcast available on YouTube, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right, James. Thank you. Have a great season, and we'll talk to you soon.